So, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating idea that, honestly, affects every single one of us, whether we realize it or not. We're talking about the paradox of competence.
I mean, you've been there, right? Sitting in a meeting or just watching the news and thinking, how? How can that person who clearly knows so little be so unbelievably certain they're right? While at the same time, the real expert in the room is the one saying, well, it's complicated. It seems totally backward, but, there's a powerful psychological reason for it.
And here's the key. The biggest problem isn't the stuff we know we don't know. The real danger is in the stuff we don't even realize we don't know. This is the world of the unknown unknowns, and it's basically the perfect breeding ground for these paradoxes of confidence to grow.
All right, so to really unpack this, we got to look at the two extremes of this whole spectrum. It's really a tale of two completely different mindsets that shape how we see our own skills.
Okay, so you've got these two big ideas clashing. On one hand, you have the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically explains the bliss of not knowing what you don't know. And on the other, you have its polar opposite, imposter syndrome, which is kind of the curse of being really capable. Let's break them both down. So what is the Dunning-Kruger effect? Well, it's this weird cognitive bias where the very skills you need to be good at something are the exact same skills you need to realize you're bad at it. It's this thing called a metacognitive deficit, which is just a fancy way of saying you literally don't know enough to know what you don't know. Now, full disclosure, some scientists argue this is just a statistical quirk, but let's be real, we've all seen this confidence-competence gap out in the wild.
And the classic, the absolute best example of this has to be the story of MacArthur Wheeler. This guy robbed banks after smearing lemon juice all over his face. Why? Because he knew lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. So, in his mind, he genuinely believed this would make him invisible to all the security cameras. His confidence was through the roof, but his competence? Not so much. He was arrested, very visibly, later that same day.
Now, let's totally flip the script and talk about the other extreme, imposter syndrome. This is where you have incredibly skilled, successful people who are just convinced they're a total fraud. Despite all the evidence of their success, they live with this constant, nagging fear that any day now they're going to be exposed, and that all their wins were just dumb luck or some kind of mistake.
And look, this isn't just some harmless self-doubt. It has real, serious consequences. It can lead to this crushing perfectionism, where people over-prepare constantly just to avoid being found out. Or it can cause you to procrastinate because you're so afraid of failing. And, over time, that's just a one-way ticket to anxiety and complete burnout.
So, okay, these are biases that mess with us as individuals. But what happens when this kind of thinking starts to infect a whole organization? Well, that's when things get really messy. And there's a perfect name for it, the Peter Principle. Yeah, back in 1969, a guy named Lawrence J. Peter just nailed this whole issue with his famous Peter Principle. It sounds almost like a joke from a comic strip, but man, is it painfully true sometimes.
So here's how it plays out in the real world. Imagine you have this absolutely brilliant programmer. She's a rock star at writing code. Because she's so great at her job, what happens? She gets promoted to manager. But here's the catch. The skills that made her an amazing coder have almost nothing to do with managing people. All of a sudden, she's in over her head, struggling in a job she's not equipped for. She's hit her level of incompetence, and now she's stuck.
And the fallout from this is huge. When you've got people in leadership roles who aren't actually competent in leading, you get this chain reaction. Productivity drops, your best people get fed up and leave because they can't stand the bad management, and any chance of real innovation just dies.
Okay, so we've seen the dark side, we've seen the pitfalls, but what does real, genuine expertise actually look like? How does an expert's brain even work differently than a novice's? Well, the biggest difference between a novice and an expert is how they organize information. For a novice, it's like a messy pile of index cards, just a long list of disconnected facts. But for an expert, it's all connected into these complex cognitive schemas. Think of it like a mental web. This lets them spot patterns in an instant, while the novice is still just staring at the chaos.
And you can really see this when the pressure's on. Studies on elite basketball players found that in a split-second decision, experts don't just randomly scan the court. Nope. Their eyes lock onto the crucial stuff. The ball's path, the key defenders. The novice? They just panic. And we see similar brain activity in law enforcement, where experts show way more cognitive control in those life-or-death moments.
So how do you get to that level? Well, it takes thousands of hours of what's called deliberate practice. But here's the thing, it has to happen in the right kind of setting.
A kind environment, like a video game or weather forecasting, gives you instant, clear feedback. You mess up, you know it right away. But a wicked environment, where the consequences of your actions are delayed or totally unclear, it's almost impossible to learn from experience alone in a situation like that.
So, the big question is, how do we escape these traps? How do we avoid being overconfident or crippled by self-doubt? Well, the answer, the antidote, is a quality that's becoming more vital than ever: intellectual humility.
Intellectual humility is really the sweet spot. It's not about being a pushover, it's about being rigorous with yourself. It's having the guts to say, you know what, I don't know, or hey, I could be wrong about this. It's about separating your ego from your ideas, so when someone challenges what you think, it doesn't feel like a personal attack.
And for anyone in a leadership role, this is basically a superpower. Leaders with intellectual humility just make better decisions because they actually listen. They build trust because they're open. And they create what's called psychological safety. That feeling where your team knows it's okay to speak up, to take risks, to innovate. And this is something that Millennial and Gen Z employees in particular really value.
And the good news is, this is a skill you can actually build. First, be real with yourself. Compare what you meant to do with what actually happened. Second, when you ask for feedback, don't let people off the hook with vague compliments. Ask for specific behavioral examples of what you did. And third, try this little mental trick called self-distancing. Imagine you're a fly on the wall watching yourself. It helps you analyze your own actions way more objectively.
Because look, the goal here isn't to be stuck in a state of constant self-doubt. The goal is to reach something we can call grounded confidence. This is where you trust your skills because they're real, but you're also humble enough to know that you've always got more to learn.
And that brings us right back to one of the wisest things ever said. Socrates' famous paradox perfectly sums up what true mastery is all about. Realizing the limits of what you know isn't a weakness. It's the absolute first step on the path to becoming truly wise.